I don't know, it would have been like some kind of, I don't know, I don't even know what they could have done, but some kind of advice or something, you know, because it was like the first time I really felt, you know, that somebody's making me feel different. I know for a fact that if, like, I ever dated another girl whose family was opposed to me dating her, I wouldn't go through the trouble of even trying. I wouldn't bother. I'd say, forget it. It's not worth it, you know? You go find somebody who's your own race your parents will love, because, like, I'm not going to go through that again. I don't need that kind of grief, right?
I grew up in Winnipeg, and what I remember, I guess, most clearly is that experiencing a lot of racism at the school that I went to and coming home and wanting some kind of support or explanation for these names I was being called. I was being called nigger a lot. And what I got instead was just a sort of a silence, a blank wall. My father was in a lot of denial, and so he didn't want to deal with these issues. And my mother was, you know, had no experience of racism and had no understanding of what I was going through, so she was silent.
Camille will not ignore the racism in her children's lives and will be actively involved in their dealings with it. In her view, mothers have a crucial role to play.
Mothers tend to be the ones that instill cultures in children. And I think if the mother is a person of color, as opposed to the father, and the mother is the one who's doing most of the nurturing and the raising of that child and the educating of that child, social educating, that a mixed child with a mother of color is going to have a different kind of development than a child whose father is a person of color. One thing, you know, that I said, okay, I'm never going to do with my kids. I'm never going to pretend that racism doesn't exist. I'm never going to pretend that there's not differences between myself and my children, because, you know, my children don't necessarily look the way I look. And, you know, I mean, I've already experienced that. Children asking me, you know, am I Louise's mother? You know, I'm kind of looking at me strangely because I don't look like him.
Camille's children are growing up with the kinds of support their mother did not have. There is more discussion of racism, more advice about how to handle it. But her son Louise still faces it.
He's aware of racism, but for him, his own self, how he's making sense of who he is and how he fits into the world, is not necessarily the same thing as all these things that Mom has told him that he's grown up hearing about. You know, that's kind of like stuff you might know about historically, like the history of our family, or the history of colonialism, and the history of racism in Canada, and, you know, First Nations people and all this kind of stuff. And, yeah, he's well aware of that. But then to take that then and integrate that into, well, who am I? How do I fit into this story?
But for him personally, the thing is how he perceives himself. It's not, it wouldn't matter how people perceive him once he's sure about how he perceives himself. And then it wouldn't matter what people think.
For the newlyweds, Shazia and Henderson, only one family can be called upon to help build that confidence.
That's right.
My parents had reacted to her in a very positive way from day one. They accepted her for who she was. They didn't really pay attention as to her religious background.
Yeah.
He thinks he knows how to play.
Yeah.
Shazia's family has still not accepted her marriage.
My dad was very shocked, and he was very upset. My mother was also very upset. And if I choose to do this, then I should be on my own. Like, if I go this route, then it will be without their support.
And you know what?
Her family's refusal to accept her husband has revealed family attitudes that will haunt their marriage perhaps for years to come. Shazia's aunt Zora knew it would be a problem from the start.
When our community learned about Shazia intending to marry Henderson, it was more like, can you believe that? A Pakistani girl, the Berry girl, is marrying a guy from Barbados? It was a no-no.
Zora was not surprised at the family's response. South Asian prejudices were emerging.
It's an unfortunate fact of life that most South Asians have double standards in that respect. They can complain endlessly about discrimination against themselves, but when it comes to, particularly when it comes to darker races, they are very, very discriminating. At least I find that one of the most discriminating communities.
I felt the entire community feels that anyone that's outside the community is basically shouldn't be married inside. Now they say that a lot of them would say that no, I'm not racist, or that oh well, I have brown skin just like you have, and look, I'm the same as you. But I truly feel that when they look at anyone else different, especially myself being black, they kind of look down and frown upon that they kind of put themselves on a higher level as me. Whereas, like the Pakistanis, like people would walk down the street when the young film, look at that patch over there, they're showing the same sort of racism towards me, it's not and not accepting me as a person.
Like all mixed-race children, Kimeko Hota, her brother John, and their cousin Sarah have all been challenged to construct an identity. For John, it was in some ways the toughest.
My Asian grandparents would say I look white, and my white grandparents say I look Asian. It was sort of even hard to find my own identity because no one else really knows my identity.
Yeah, I found that in Canada, being seen as Asian, but when I went to Japan, people saw me as white.
Very much.
To the family, John looks the least Asian of the Hota children. Elsewhere, there is a frequent subtle tension as people try to place him in the racial spectrum.
It's always like you give them an exotic look to your face, or they look in something, trying not to make it too obvious what they're after. Sometimes I just like to give them a hard time and tell them that I'm Canadian and ask where my parents are from. I say from Canada, grandparents Canada, just to sort of, I guess I just get tired of getting asked the same questions over and over again about where I'm from.
And sometimes that's annoying, but I guess if they wanted to know, just to sort of get an idea of what I'm about, then I don't mind. But I see what you mean, but most times I'm not offended by that. People keep asking us until they get to the questions around food and martial arts and all of that. But what the reason that they're asking has to do with race, because they're looking at us and they're seeing race. But the questions that they're asking us are questions of culture. But we're fourth generation Canadian. We're more Canadian than most of the people that are asking us these questions. And what do we know about the culture?
I remember when I was at university, I think I was looking for a job or something, and my roommate came home one day with a job posting, and he said, "This one's perfect for you." And I sat down and I started reading it, and there was like qualifications that I had and some that I didn't, but the last one was hiring a minority, a visible minority that you had to be. And I sat down and I started thinking, am I a visible minority? I wasn't quite sure. And in fact, if you asked me that today, I probably still couldn't answer that fully because I don't really consider myself a part of a visible minority. I always thought of myself pretty much as Canadian.
I tried to see myself as more white or belonging to the rest of my Canadian culture and being the same as everyone else at school. But I think a lot of my classmates saw me differently. And it wasn't until recently I've realized that I'm not Canadian, as I've always thought. And the fact that I do look very Asian.
I feel that Kimiko's name reflects her personality quite well. I don't think changing my name from John Richard Wolfson Hata to Yoshi Hata or something would really do that much for me.
I think that I do look more Asian than my brother does. And so I think that has prompted me to respond maybe differently than my brother has. Where my brother can pass for white, I don't think that I have ever passed for white.
I remember when we first moved into this present area that we live in, meeting a lot of people, and then it seemed that when people found out that Kim was my sister, then they sort of viewed me differently because they didn't think I was Asian before that, and then they saw Kim, and then I started getting all the bad jokes or little limericks or whatever about Chinese, Japanese, or whatnot. I felt more acceptance when people didn't know that I was Asian.
There is less ambiguity for the most socially conscious of the John children, Daniel. He seems the most content with his double-sided nature. He roams freely in both cultures, choosing the most attractive and useful bits of each. His idea of the Virgin Mary bridges the gaps in an imaginative and unself-conscious manner. It's a unified whole from two contrasting halves, the blue gown of the Christian tradition topped by a nose ring. Daniel has had the benefit of watching his sister and brother put their pieces of the puzzle together. He has a different way, and it works for him.
You've done a fine job here.
Thank you.
You're such a detailed man. Is this your idea of marrying a child?
Yep. I'm pretty sure.
You're pretty sure?
That's what you
Okay.
more so than like blonde and blue-eyed. Anyway.
You've got an interesting combination there, Dan, in that she looks very Indian, but her skin is even whiter than mine.
Well, that's like because she was Jewish, so she wasn't like that dark-skinned, I don't think. Like Jewish people are.
It's interesting you put a nose ring. How come?
Because in the Bible, you know, in the Old Testament, it talks about nose rings. I think it was gave it to Rachel at the well, gave a nose ring. And also I read books on it, like I looked it up to see whether that's what they would have worn, and it said, yeah, they wore nose rings, so I said to put a nose ring on. It shocks people, but still.
That's half of your battle, huh?
Yeah.
Like Dad and Mom don't freak out on you and do stuff like that. Like they understand, right?
Yeah. Although Mom is like, well, not so much with the nose ring, but like
because of the big boobs.
Yeah. Well, that's Indian stylistic trait. It's not anything like Mom makes it out to be some kind of hideous thing. But anyway, that's what Indian art is like. But anyway,
it wasn't.
I'm defending myself here. But anyways, she did get like, when I made that picture of God with like many arms, because like it's symbolic, right? And anyways, who says he doesn't? I mean, what is it? Say in the Bible, God only has 2 arms. Period.
Well, I think God's supposed to be a spirit, so he
yeah,
really
exactly.
have a bodily
like,
shape, right?
The point is it's symbolic, and she was like, that's not the Christian God at first, but then after a while, it's like, you know, Mom, she gets like that.
Daniel's investigations have actually refocused his family's attention on its Indian history and culture.
Daniel probably is the one that has always had the most of a sense of injustice, you could say, because and he's been the one most...
You read the history books and people that are put out to be heroes and that were racist, whether it's against blacks or native people, they're racist and they're heroes in one of the history books.
He's been very good at you know, bringing that out. Now, he's done a lot of reading and all this sort of thing, so he knows the cultures, you see, so he knows what these guys were talking about. And he, you know, he can bring that sort of stuff out. And one of the things that he's done, I mean, right here at home, because, you know, some of my attitudes have been wrong. And I, partly conscious, partly unconscious, you know, because, of course, I've been formed by the kind of education I got. You know, I didn't know there was such a thing as African civilization. I mean, I really didn't, you know, because it was never really mentioned as such.
Daniel's investigation has sometimes made him angry, yet that anger is useful for his family.
Daniel's anger and indignation ignites something in me, and he challenges Sunit, maybe even more than I do, or else Sunit, you know, it would just be Sunit's opinion. And so his anger and his good example of reading and finding out about that makes me angry too, and I think that's a good thing, because when we get emotional, we'll do something, even if that emotion just changes us. And then I'm more likely to speak out when I hear somebody say something, because I have some facts that he's taught me. So that's the good thing about our kids' anger, is they're not just angry against a particular incident or thing that's done, but he's even angry on behalf of people that are not dead.